We are live. Good evening, everybody. I'll just leave it for 10 or 20 seconds for more people to join, but thank you very much for being here. It was Pancake Tuesday last week, which was very exciting, but we have an equally inspiring panel this evening for you as last week. So well done for being here. We really hope you enjoy it and get a lot from it. So I'll just wait a few more seconds for people to join. I'll mention this again, but if you have any questions at all during tonight's seminar, do pop them in the Q&A box. We do see all the questions that come in, and there'll be plenty of time at the end for us to answer them. So anything that pops into your head, do pop it in, and we'll do our best to get through it. Okay, so on to tonight's event. We are here to listen to Lissa, Gillott from Virgin Startup, Liz Choonara from Crisis, who heads up entrepreneurship there, and Esme, Verity, who set up her own consultancy called Atmos. That's all about helping people find alternative funding, and she's a few other roles also. We're going to talk about fundraising, funding, and investment for your social enterprise. So you're very, very welcome. What is a good entrepreneur, I should say, before we proceed? So to us at City Ventures and Better Space, a good entrepreneur is one that has people, planet, and profit at the core of what it does, or has a true social or environmental impact. So basically, they're people trying to make the world and its people a better place. So this is the second last event in the series of 5, and next week is all about hearing from some very early stage social enterprises. So there's Joey Lee from Leho, Lauren LeFranc from the Little Coffee Company, and Patrick Harding from the Joy app, who are relatively early on in their journey, and we're going to hear lots of kind of nuggets about how they found setting up their own social enterprise, what they do, the impact that they have. So after tonight's session, be sure to sign up for that one. It's the finale, and it culminates also in the Pitched for Good awards, which I'll explain a little bit further. In terms of who's bringing you tonight's event, it is from City, University of London, which is based in Islington, and there's about 20,000 students attend City every year. In 2019, it got voted the most sustainable university in London, which we're very proud of. And it runs through City Uni Ventures, or City Ventures, I should say, tons of entrepreneurial programs for City students and alumni, but also events like this, which everybody can come to. So if you are a City student or alumni, be sure to follow the at City Uni Ventures to find out details on what's happening. You can get one-to-one advice. They have a free accelerator program. They have lots of support programs and workshops that you can sit in on, so be sure to follow them. But there's also a Pitch for Good competition that's running, and sadly it's just for City students and recent alumni. But if you are one of those and have a good idea for making the world a better place, be sure to sign up. You can take a little screenshot of the QR code on the right hand side, or go to the website. The deadline for that competition is tomorrow, so be sure to sign up and get involved in that. Who am I? I am Samuel Lahan. I am the head of operations on a project called Better Space, which I'll tell you about shortly. I also co-founded a couple of creative startups, one called NYO, and I'm in the studio at the moment, and one called Creative Jungle, and it's all about helping people get creative. And we've helped tens of thousands of adults get creative since we got set up a couple of years ago. And I've worked in social enterprises before, helping people get access to digital literacy skills in Africa with Choonara, and also in Sir Richard Branson's not-for-profit entrepreneurial arm, Virgin Startup, which Lissa also works in. So you'll find out more about that. So on to Better Space, who's one of the partners for tonight. All the details there to follow it are on the left-hand side. It is going to be an amazing and inspiring and affordable co-working and event space for social entrepreneurs, social impact startups, and change makers based in and around Islington. We'd love to be the home of the next generation of Change Please, Patagonia, Elvis and Cressy, Olio, all these great companies making the world a better place. It'll open in May. I was had a site inspection earlier today because the fit out has started and it's really starting to come together, and it'll launch in May, as I mentioned. Yeah, and it's going to be a really incredible space. So if you're interested in getting something up and running or have a team of 2 to 6 people, be sure to give us a follow or sign up to the newsletter, and we will be sharing details over the coming weeks. And it's in this incredible building you can see on the right hand side. Back to tonight. We have Lissa, Liz, and Esme, as I mentioned, who have incredible experiences that cover the whole spectrum of the funding landscape, which is why we've invited them along and are very, very excited for you all to hear what's happening. What they can advise. As I mentioned, do ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll get to them. There's a good 20 minutes to half an hour at the end for us to get through them. We're going to start with, I'll ask each of them some questions. We'll just have a bit of a chat about different perspectives, and then we'll get to your audience Q&A. Okay, so I'd like to invite the speakers to the stage, please. And we can have a little quiz, or just keep these pictures in mind, excuse me, about who does what. But for now, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to have a bit of a chat about funding and how to get some funding for any great ideas that you may have or any organizations that you currently work in. Okay. So, hello. If everybody could unmute. Sorry, the classic. Hi, good evening. What I think I'd like to do to start off is to, first of all, hear from each of you. Why do you do what you do? Because I think it's important. What drives you? What's the passion behind what you do? And just maybe tell a little bit about what you do. So I guess I might just, Lissa's on my left-hand side on the screen, and we go clockwise. But Lissa, if you'd like to start off, that would be great.
For sure. Yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. Evening. Lovely to see you or be joined by you. Yeah, so as Sam said, I work for Virgin Startup with a not-for-profit that sits within the Virgin Group. And we support early stage founders on their startup journey. Mainly we do this by providing the startup loan product, which is a loan that you can take out. You can take out anything from £500 to £25,000 over 5 years. I won't go into the big sell because I'm sure we can come to that later on. But why do I find we also do other programs? So we have accelerator programs as well as programs which support businesses who want to crowdfund. And we've got one starting at the moment called Collective Impact, which is really, really exciting, amongst other things. Why do I do what I do? Why do I enjoy it? Well, I think inside me there is a wannabe entrepreneur who just hasn't really found her idea yet. And so I absolutely love seeing people start their journey and helping them on that journey, because a lot of what we do is provide advice, support, ideas in how you can craft your project or your new business. And I really thrive off that. I find that quite easy. People tell me what's going on. I'm like, well, why haven't you done that? And they're like, oh, so obvious. And often, you know, if it's right in front of you, you can't see it. So that's what I really enjoy doing. And also, we'll come to talk about these as well. All the businesses that we've supported and the team at Virgin Startup really enjoy going out and playing the game, BSU in the wild. So spotting businesses that we funded on shelves, in aeroplanes, trains, wherever. So yeah, that's what I do. Hopefully, in a bit of a nutshell, and why I enjoy doing it.
Nice. So to summarize, if you want to get in touch with Richard Branson, drop Lissa an email. But yeah, no, as I mentioned, I used to work in Virgin Startup. It's a great organization. They fund tons of startups, so it's a really inspiring place to be. Liz, if you wouldn't mind, the why and the what would be great to hear.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Liz from the National Charity for Homelessness Crisis. My role as head of entrepreneurship is to head up all our existing businesses that raise funds for the charity, but also I founded our first venture studio, which is essentially the gateway for startups to work with the charity. So we're looking to take equity investment in startups with products or services that can help us end homelessness, and we're also looking to build our own ventures. So why do I do what I do? So last year, there were 280,000 people in this country who experienced homelessness.
Wow.
During the pandemic, that rose by another 20,000, and we are expecting that figure to rise. However, we've written the plan on how to end homelessness, and we want to put ourselves out of business. We know that homelessness isn't inevitable. And for me, before crisis, I was working at Imperial College London, and I saw these students with these incredible inventions and talents, and what they struggled to do was to connect their fantastic idea, their ambition, with the people who needed their service or product the most. And I think what I'm most excited about doing at Crisis is unlocking the talent of entrepreneurs who have the right ambitions, the right motivation, but just don't know how to make the product or service work. So I'm really, what drives me is knowing there's a huge amount of talent out there that can help us accelerate the end of homelessness in the UK.
Nice. Wow. Incredible. It's really great to hear. Although the figures are a little bit depressing, but I guess as we go on, we can speak about how to get funding to help Crisis tackle these problems as well. Esme, hello.
Hi, lovely to be here. So I'm Esme. I am a founder. So I'm building a company called Atmos, and we sort of work to help teach founders and educate investors on how to raise alternative funding. I'm also involved in Zebras Unite, which is a global movement, and it's a co-op to help founders build sustainable and inclusive startups. I'm also a scout for Ada Ventures, which is a venture capital firm. Why I do what I do, I suppose it's probably quite similar to the rest of the panel, that I suppose I started off as an entrepreneur. Like my parents are entrepreneurs, my sister is, it's there, can't fight it. And I looked to launch my own business and get funding when I was sort of like 18, 19. And, you know, I failed to raise any funding. I went through quite a traditional route of venture capital. So venture capital is when you take funding from like an institutional funding, so a large fund, and they get equity, so they get a share in your business. And for whatever reason, you know, it didn't work out. And I was just like, you know, is it me? Am I inexperienced? Like, what is going on? So I was like, you know what, let's work in some startups. Let's understand what it means to work at a company that's got venture capital funding, because I thought that was the only route I could go down. And then I worked in various different startups. Some of them venture capital funding worked, some of them really didn't. And I was like, am I hitting a wall? Like, we can't all take this kind of funding. We don't all have businesses that match it. And then I said, like, talking to more founders and giving, you know, bits of advice on what I learned along the way. And I was like, you know what, there's more of us. 99.9% of founders will never get venture capital funding. And it's not a bad thing. It's an opportunity to build a different kind of business and take different kinds of funding. And that's what I'm really interested in, you know, sharing that knowledge that should be free and accessible to more founders.
Nice. Yeah, no, there's so many different ways, as you hopefully learned from tonight, about setting up an organization and different types of funding, but you tend to just hear about get a big check from a VC and off you go. But there's so many different ways. And kind of with that in mind, I guess, what are the key things you each think it's useful for people to know when they are raising funds? And I guess it could be most useful to answer that question from the perspective of the backgrounds you're from, as in Lissa, more kind of the debt funding side, Liz, the more kind of charity side, but you've gone a little bit into the equity, and then Esme on the kind of alternative funding, grants, whatever, all sorts of things, bootstrapping, whatever the case is. But yeah, if you've kind of 2 or 3 insights that might be useful for somebody out there that has an idea, doesn't really know where to start from funding. Whoever would like to jump in, go for it.
Yeah, I can take a first stab at it. I would even step go back one further step and ask yourself, do you need to fundraise?
Yeah, really true.
Really ask yourself that question. The thing that I encourage all founders to do before they even, you've got your idea, what you can do next is try and put together like a solid financial plan. There's a reason why lots of founders come from consulting backgrounds. It's because that's what they do in their job. And so they're really good at doing these financial models and these business plans, but it's like, it's not exclusively their area, and we can all learn to do it, or we can go and get the help we need. But like really put together a financial plan of what it could look like if you could even hit revenue sooner than you think, and not even go down the fundraising route. If you need to fundraise, if you need to get a certain amount before maybe you can hit revenue, or you've got an idea that needs a lot of funding, think about how much you actually need. Like properly, if you were like really tough in your financial plan, how much money do you need? And then you can look at what funding is appropriate for your business based on what your business model, how you'll make money, could look like.
That's really good. No, love that. Yeah,
Can I
Liz.
jump in? Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, Lissa. Yeah, go for it.
We're all nodding, but no, Esme, I really wanted to add to what you said there. I think that a lot of the time what we see is, how do you start a business? Well, venture capital, that's the only thing, that's the thing that's sexy when it comes to setting up a business, is you go out and you get all this cash. I'm often on a panel with, crowdfunders and a VC, and I'm sat there going, yeah, and there's debt funding, FYI, you don't have to share your pie. There is some benefits to it. And I think what you've said there in terms of outline, what do you think you need? And then like divide it by 10, probably often. Imagine that you're putting your money in yourself. I just wanted to talk from our perspective. So if you're looking for debt funding and why you might take out debt funding, what are we interested in? Based on our product, we look at personal affordability. So we're looking at an individual and saying, okay, if you want to take out this money, what does that mean for you in terms of what your current outgoings are? Because we don't want to overextend you. So, again, similar to if you're going to put equity in, you're answerable to someone. At some point, someone is going to expect some form of payment. So really do think, like, before you go down that route, is like, how can you maintain the control, I would say. And when we're looking at applications, we've looked at the personal affordability, and then we're looking at the business viability. And what we really want to see, and what I would say anyone on this panel would say, is you need to go out and you need to prove that you're solving a problem, that this problem exists. And there is a wonderful organization called Pop-Up Business School. I don't know if anyone's come across them. Alan Donegan set it up. And he basically does sessions whereby he gets groups of people together. Apparently they hire out empty shops in malls and in shopping centers. Gives everyone like, okay, think of your idea, go out, go sell it. And they basically sell it before they've even created anything. And that is the kind of process you want to go through. You want to be talking to someone and saying, I'm going to put this together. Are you going to buy it? If everyone goes, maybe later, no, I think you need to rethink. And you probably not quite got the product or the service that is filling a gap. So that would be my thought. Hopefully that was succinct or relative.
Yes. Oh no, really, really good. And Liz, I guess from a charity perspective, a little bit, I might have totally thrown a curveball in here, but I am interested in the charity space. A lot of the people you're supporting can't pay for it, so it can be a totally different cycle to kind of get enough funds to kind of operate in the first instance, because you're not necessarily selling a product to somebody, and that can bring cash flow into the business. So if you happen to have any thoughts on that as well, that would be great. But otherwise, go back to your original answer, whatever it was.
I love it. So thanks. But firstly, just to answer, I just want to follow up on one of Esme's points around appropriate funding, because I think it's so important that founders educate themselves on the range of funding that's available to them, and what are you happy to compromise on as a founder? So, you know, firstly, yeah, absolutely get the financials done. But when you're looking at your funding options, what is most important to you? What type of business do you want to build? What kind of things will you compromise on, and will you not compromise on building in your business? So whether it's in the longer term, potentially taking a VC investment, or whether it's in the early stages of taking, let's say you're looking for public funding, and that means that you have to report against certain metrics, and it could be quite bureaucratic. I'm not saying that is in all cases, but it can be. You know, what are you willing to give your time to? And I think the most important thing, as Lissa was just saying, is actually that you're constantly testing your value proposition. You are constantly reiterating, you're constantly building and constantly listening to your customers, to your users. And how much can you spend time doing that, rather than getting, you know, wrapped up in, and this sounds awful again, but the vanity project sometimes of fundraising. So I think sometimes there is a glamour that's associated with I'm fundraising, and actually not necessarily getting the hard work done of building the product or service that you need to, and actually testing that out. So I'd say it's really important to think about appropriate funding. It's really important to find out what funding is available, and we have a role to do that as the startup ecosystem in sharing our knowledge. The problem is the access to funding, the knowledge of where funding lies. It can be quite closed and gatekept, and I think there is I'm seeing a lot of movement now towards opening the doors to founders wherever they're from, and to make sure that information is like shared out. But we definitely have a role to make sure people are aware. In terms of what you're willing to do in terms of how you seek funding if you don't have that many resources. So yeah, through the Venture Studio, we support those who have lived experience of homelessness, who, you know, it's not so easy just to live off parents' funding, and they don't have that safety net that some entrepreneurs do when they first start out. So actually what we're trying to do is to build sustainable businesses. So we give out grants to those who've experienced homelessness to set up their businesses, but we also work with a whole range of ecosystem partners who also provide funding to sort of provide that safety net that doesn't exist elsewhere.
Nice. And what, I guess, from each of your perspectives, what is a warning that you see from somebody that might make you reluctant to give funding? Like, is there things that kind of entrepreneurs are doing that don't particularly make sense to doing? And I guess not focusing on the customer is obviously a huge one, and kind of not actually trying to get some traction. But is there things that, when, I don't know, like Lissa, if an application comes across your desk to review for funding or something, that you're just going, it doesn't make sense, either they're not ready or they're doing things they just shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it can be tricky because to be an entrepreneur, you have to be an exceptional optimist, I think, most of the time. You know, entrepreneurs think differently, and that's what's so wonderful about them. They're finding problems and they're thinking of solutions all the time, and often their brains are like, "Whoa." So yeah, they've already built their spaceship before they've even, you know, sort of worked out what material they're going to use, whatever. So what are warning signs for me? Things like in the first year you're going to turn over $1 million with no product built yet. Perhaps, you know, you're creating a drinks brand, you haven't actually got your formula. Just pare it back. It's not worth it. I don't need to see, personally, I don't need to see that you're going to turn over $1 million in the first year. On average, I think people that are self-employed are making make 30 grand a year, is what someone shared with me recently. Can't cite those stats, but that's sort of apparently a national average. So, you know, be realistic in terms of what does this look like? And yes, it's the so if you give us money, we're going to get this funding, which is often VC, crowdfunding, etc., which is going to be in the millions. And that's sort of booked into the cash flow. There's no start has been made in terms of that cash in terms of that campaign, and for me that sort of makes my heart drop a bit, because I'm like, it doesn't exist. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'll believe it when it's booked, and then we can operate from that basis. But just think about what you've got. I mean, to Liz's point, you know, it's like, access the funding, like perhaps it's a grant that you're going to start out with, you know, that there's so many different options, and each of those will, with the application processes, will help you tailor actually your business idea to some extent, and perhaps take off a few zeros. It's worth, I think it's better to go with worst case scenario and then you know, if you prove me wrong and you turn over $1 million in the first year, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And you know, I'm sure it can happen, has happened, but yeah, that would be, well, yeah, brings me down a bit sometimes.
Oh, yeah, no, it makes sense. Anyone, anything further to add to that point? Or Liz, you nodded, go for it.
Yeah, I'm super keen to answer this one simply because so we're looking at the moment to take equity in different ventures. And one of the big turnoffs for us in terms of investing in those businesses is we're really interested in the team and how amenable the team is to working with us. So obviously we're a homelessness charity. Whatever we invest, we need to be able to demonstrate it has a direct impact on our mission. And I think it's when a founder isn't willing to engage with you around, you know, if they want that investment. So if they've gone as far as saying, we want to work, we want to take your investment, we know what or we want your investment, we know what the terms look like, then, you know, you also, there has to be a bit of give and take around what you're willing to compromise on or understand. So as I was saying, you know, early on, you need to be really clear as a founder what you are going to compromise and what you're not going to compromise on, so that when you get to those conversations, you're not pulling your hair out as the investor, just thinking, come on, you know, this is, we have been really clear around what's expected, and I don't think anyone wants to be in the situation where they're just wasting time. So whether you're on the investor side or whether you're the startup yourself, so I think just being being a great team, like being really clear what's involved in the funding and being amenable to feedback as well from your investor.
Nice. Yeah, that's really, really good advice. Esme, anything to add?
Yes. So I was just thinking about the biggest mistakes I've seen founders make, and with founders that I've worked with, and I think a lot of founders sort of don't believe that they can do anything without any funding, and so therefore actually end up not doing anything. Whereas, like, you know, the reality is, yes, you're very early stage, you may have an idea, but there are lots and lots of things that you can do to put yourself in the best position possible to access a variety of funding. These things being, you know, as if I'm an investor, I want to know what is the problem you're actually trying to solve very clearly. You've really dug into that and done some user research. I want to know what you think your solution is, and your solution is probably wrong, but that doesn't necessarily matter. It's, you know, it needs to be guided by your research, and you need to be flexible with what your solution could end up being. And then I want to know, you know, who you are, as Liz said, the team, who you've managed to get around you, and then like some idea of traction. Like, do people actually want this enough? Are they banging at your door being like, I want this right now because this problem is so painful, I cannot progress? And then you will get funding.
Nice. What I was going to suggest as well on that is just about being realistic about projections and stuff. Is I think a lot of people underestimate the funding of their own life when they set up the startup, as in they think they're going to get a big chunk of funding or get lots of sales and forget about they need to pay their own bills, and like, what can they control from that perspective, as in, can they move into a bigger flat share so their rent is less, so they actually have more funds to exist for longer? Because kind of running out of funds is one of the biggest causes, obviously, why startups fail, especially if you're not appealing to investors and not having the time to build that traction. So kind of, I think it's important for people to hear that as well, is that look at all your costs on an individual basis and see how you can strip things out. Some people, not everybody has the luck to be able to move home, but like lots of founders do move home, so they can hopefully reduce their rental costs and just kind of strip out any kind of discretionary costs to allow you the time and freedom to explore your idea and kind of get the traction on it. But yeah, I think obviously what everybody said makes tons and tons of sense. In terms of, let's go on grant funding and delve into that a little bit more, because I know it's not suitable for every type of organization, but there is a lot more grant funding available than people might know about. And I know the Zebras Unite there's a really good directory of all the grant funding that's available. But what what organizations might be suitable for grant funding, just for people listening, because that is a kind of an equity-free way potentially to get some initial investment.
Yeah, I can start. So I always like to add about grant funding before people get too overexcited at this free money concept. It is free money, but it still comes with lots of, you know, obligations and ties. It can be very bureaucratic and require you to, you know, it's very time consuming to report on what you do to a grant funding body. It can also, the way that the grant is set up, when you apply for a grant, you make certain, for most grants, not all, you make certain promises about what you think your business will be. And then once, if you get the grant, difficult to like pivot or move away, and that the being able to pivot and being flexible is really important in your business. So it's worth weighing up the pros and the cons. But in terms of accessing grants, in terms of your sort of legal entity, as it were, so like how you're structured, it is much easier to get funding if you're a nonprofit, or something called a CIC, a community interest company. If you're a community interest company, limited by guarantee, I can share some resources on what this means afterwards if anyone is interested. But it means you look more like a nonprofit, so it's much easier to get that kind of funding. You can for profit for sure, and there are lots of resources out there. You know, as you say, Zeb's Unite, we did a big article and we ran 2 events on grant funding, which I can share the links with. But if I was going to do some top tips from those events that I got, as somebody who's also applied for grants, I was like, it's all about quality over quantity. There are loads of grants out there. You can spend your entire life applying for grants and get nowhere. Really pinpoint the ones that you read it. You know, when you look at a job description, you're like, that is me. I'm not pretending. I'm not trying to like make some, you know, adding some bits here. And you're like, that is exactly my business. Mm. You know, really go for it. Spend like a solid month on this, and you are far more likely to get that grant than doing it the night before, which I've also done, and it did not go well.
Nice. Anyone, anything to add to that on grant funding?
For me, it's a bit like, this sounds terrible, but it's a bit like dating as well, isn't it? You want to find your perfect partner. So it's also about, in terms of the quality, it's about what is this partner going to give me? Like, so if it's, for example, just thinking of one business I worked with at Imperial, so a team called Jelly Drops. They developed these sweets which hydrate people who suffer with dementia, and they partnered with the Alzheimer's Society. So they went through their accelerator program, they got a grant, and part of the deal is that you sign up to publicize your association with that charity. So, you know, charities want to do this because they want to be seen to be supporting innovative new businesses, addressing a problem, and essentially out of that, they got a fantastic return. You know, it's exactly the work with dementia patients. The trust that you get from working with the Alzheimer's Society is huge, and you know, they've had over 100 million views of their video on BBC, you know, in terms of the credibility they got. So I'd say it's really important to think about in terms of the grant, and that is obviously a very, you know, that's a big success story, and that doesn't happen every single time, but it's really important to think about who you're selecting as your grant giver in terms of what they can give you in terms of your reputation, in terms of raising your profile, because profile, you know, early on can be really, really important.
And I guess you could, if you spot a grant and you want to apply for it, you could speak to people that have received a grant, because I'm sure they're on the website, there'll be case studies, and speak to the founders of those companies or the people that applied and just ask, what was the experience like? Was it painful? Was it seamless? Was it helpful? Did it feel more like a partnership? Might really, really help, because I know, yeah, every grant application does take time. So you want to, as Esme said, make sure you're kind of picking your battles. Lissa.
I have to admit, I'm not much of an expert on grants. It's an interesting area. Liz talking about areas being difficult to unlock. I would say grants, to me, it's just like a mystery. But what I would say is consider working with a consultancy that might be able to help you. So I think there's the Granted consultancy. If I don't check them right, I'll look through my emails. But they can support applications. They can either advise on a good grant that might be worth pursuing based on your business, and they can then say, we can support you in putting the grant application together. Now, if you don't have much experience, that could be really valuable. Again, thinking about your time costs. So something to bear in mind. Other things to bear in mind from our perspective is we often see people who are applying for a grant and we can match fund them, because often you have to bill, or I don't know what the terminology is, sorry, but you would present what you've spent at the end of a quarter. So you need the money. So sometimes that can be quite tricky. But there are organizations that will unlock that as well. I think I came across recently an organization that was like, well, if you've been granted a grant, we will give you the money up front. And then, so things to bear in mind in terms of if you're planning that and putting that into your runway as well, because again, applications can take 6 to 8 months. Are you going to survive that long?
And that kind of brings us nicely onto partly the next question around, partly about networking, but partly about getting advice. And kind of, I know mentorships talked a lot about in startups, but kind of, do people have any good suggestions around networking, first of all? Because I think a lot of founders, they don't know what they don't know, and they need to speak to people and figure things out and hear about, okay, you can get match granting, great. How do I do that? How do I find the people, and where do I get that knowledge? So if anyone has any tips on just networking and kind of getting that advice from people on what you're doing, from a funding perspective, it'd be great to hear.
Well, firstly, if you're a student here, clearly you have a great team who I'm just after. I'm just trying to get some less points here. Yeah, a great team in the City University London team, and most universities do have a startup team who can sort of advise you on sort of that basic information. I'd also say that there's lots of organisations that are, you know, constantly sharing events and clinics and office hours where you can just go and ask. I think the worst thing that you can do right at the beginning is being so nervous about asking. Everyone has to start somewhere. There's never a stupid question, just ask. So Capital Enterprise is a great network in London, which is constantly sharing events. But yeah, my advice would be just to go and do your research, but you know, there are plenty of people who are willing to have a conversation with you and point you in the right direction. I'd also say, in particular for diverse sort of young founders, there are a lot of initiatives at the moment about, as I said, unlocking sort of some of this information which has been historically quite exclusive, and actively trying to make sure people are trained up in sort of how to fundraise and, you know, where to look for funding. So organizations like YSYS, I'd strongly recommend looking them up, or One Tech, again, initiative run by Capital Enterprise, both really great teams, like opening up the entrepreneurial world.
Nice. I'd add a little bit to that, as in, I think every person in the startup space likes supporting the next generation and answering questions. And like, if you have questions, just ask people. Not everyone might reply, but more often than not, people will apply and give you a little bit of advice that will help you on the journey. Because I think, people are just very afraid a lot of the time, or they might feel like they might seem a bit silly or something. But as Liz said, there's no stupid question when you're doing something you've never done before. So ask as many questions as you like to kind of get comfortable. But sorry, anything further to add, Lissa or Esme, on this?
From my perspective, Virgin Startup, can I give a bit of a plug? So we run monthly events. They're currently digital, and that gives gives founders the opportunity to meet like-minded founders. People are in the same position as yourselves, and you can reach out, link with them, follow up, etc. And we also have mentors that attend our events. And when people get funding from us, they join our funded club community, and in that you can get peer-to-peer support. The other thing I wanted to mention was Y Combinator is one of their advice recently. They've got a startup school, which is great. Basically, everyone you meet, just get their details, you know, ask if you can add them to your newsletter if you're starting up your business, and you can start then building up your contacts. And it might not be, I think what's difficult is if you ask someone you know directly, like, can you help? Often what's actually better is if you just reach out and say, I have this problem, do you know someone who? And that gives people just that, you know, a little bit of an opportunity to say, okay, I can't do it, but I'm more than happy to introduce you to. And I think that that can be quite a good technique in terms of increasing your network. And if there are people that you admire and they've set up a business or they're doing something in the same sort of space as you, similar to what Sam said, reach out to them anywhere, you know, anywhere possible. Drop them an email and say, look, I really admire what you did here. This is what I'm trying to do. Do you have 20 minutes for a coffee? And you know, they're more than happy. Most people are more than happy to put that time in their diary, because they can tell you where they went wrong and where they wish they'd done something different, I think, most of the time.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely echo the just reaching out to people, you know, just cold email or on LinkedIn or whatever. Like I rarely get no's, and it's not because I'm a fancy person who's super interesting. It's just that most people actually really want to help. But I would say, but I would also caveat that with try not to just be like, can I just get a coffee or a virtual coffee or however it's now expressed, because it's, you know, like I get a lot of those and I try and help when I can, but if I know that I can definitely be helpful, if you're like, I want to know this thing, I can be like, oh, I can actually help you. Let's have a 30-minute Zoom call. If I'm not, then I'm like, I don't know if this is really, you know, I can be that helpful. 2 more points. I'm glad that you said YS Liz, because they are my favorite community in London, the world, whatever. They were like probably my entry point into this whole ecosystem. I think you really need you need that entry point, and it can be difficult when you don't know anybody and there's no one, but like you just find that one person who knows somebody else. And, you know, and don't make that connection, don't waste that connection. So somebody gave me some really good advice a couple of years ago. They're like, you know what, get that one person and then ask them, do you know 2 other people that I could talk to about this particular issue or just about whatever the thing is? And they will be like, yeah, sure, absolutely. I got my best friend, you know, and then it'll like grow from there. It's like every single opportunity, maximize as much as you can.
And yeah, I guess what would help with that is distilling what you do, as in don't have a rambling 10 minutes backstory. Here's what I've done the last 3 years. Have it distill what you do kind of, and the best way to distill is just tell loads of people, tell your friends, family, just, it's almost like practicing the pitch a little bit, like just be clear what you do, why you do it, what the impact is. And then the key things that you're struggling with, just again, distill those. And then if you happen to bump into someone or connect with someone, you can just ask them, or if you're emailing somebody, paragraph, here's what I do, here's what I'm struggling with, any chance you could advise or have a chat on it. That can kind of, it cuts to the chase a little bit, and you're more likely to get help if you approach it in that way, I would think, rather than send like a massive email to somebody who's very, very busy. Just try and distill it as much as you can, and you get better with that just with practice and kind of and trying it. So yeah, so we mentioned the YS. Is there any other organizations that, or podcasts or books around funding that you would suggest people check out? What's your go-tos?
Oh, obviously Zebras Unite is a great resource. I forgot to mention that, so that's a great job. I also have a newsletter that I ran for Zebras Unite, but I'm launching it separately. On basically, I try and distill all the sort of funding opportunities that are coming up in the UK every month, all the different sort of, you know, basically like opportunities for early stage startups that aren't necessarily going down that traditional route. I try and sum up. I also find Twitter a very useful space. You know, there's lots of very like kind people just sharing things that they find interesting. And so again, just find that one person who is like, you know, super into plugged in, and they will be your like access point to loads of other people.
Nice. Yeah, I get, there's a little bit, not a game you can play on social, but because you can get in contact with anyone in the world on social media pretty much, like it can help to comment on people's posts a little bit, build a little bit of a rapport before you ask them something, because when you just come out of the blue, hey, I have this problem, can you help me, give me an hour of your time, sometimes depending on how busy somebody is, it might be a bit more difficult. But if you kind of consciously put yourself in their shoes and kind of consciously just be proactive, share some things that they do, and then go in and ask a question, you're probably more likely to get a reply also. Sorry, Liz, I saw you put your hand up very politely on this one.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I imagine everyone is already signed up to this, but in terms of for trends in what's happening in Europe, I love Sifted. It's
Yeah.
my favorite. I'm often sharing news stories and interesting articles, and you know, one of the biggest trends for me actually that's been really exciting to see is the rise in impact investing in recent especially in the last few years. So now it's I think it's at 715 billion as a market.
Wow.
And so in terms of just staying on top of what the trends are and sort of innovative ways of people fundraising, I'd say that Sifted is a newsletter is quite an interesting place to look for those interesting stories. But I think just to go back to what I was saying before, actually, if you're a city university student, you've got a team who are there to sort of navigate you through those different options of funding. So it's just, you know, sitting down, having a cup of tea and a chat about what you're looking for.
Nice. And there is, for everybody listening, there's so much funding. I know there's a pandemic and all that stuff is happening, but there's so much support and programs and funding out there. So do speak to people in the space and get advice, and kind of try, if you can, get signposting about where to go and what to check out. There's programs launching every week. Joining the channels that people mentioned. Sifted is really good. I think they might be setting up a more sustainable focused newsletter. I think I saw that last week. Definitely, I think it's sifted.eu, Zebras Unite. You can sign up to a Slack channel. Loads of people share lots of stuff in there. YSYS, One Tech, particularly for underrepresented founders. They have incredible programs going on the whole time. There's a pre-accelerator program they're redoing quite soon. So have a look, speak to people, check online. There's tons of things happening. I'm sorry, Lissa, did you have any other, apart from Virgin Startup, obviously?
I was just going to plug Virgin Startup again. Yeah, I'd just say look at case studies. We have a phenomenal amount of case studies because we think that tells the stories better than we could. So on our socials, we have a Founder Friday piece that goes out. Other thoughts I had in terms of thinking about funding is, and again, alternative funding, looking on platforms such as Swoop funding. So they're essentially, and they probably won't like me, I don't know if they describe themselves this way, but almost like a money supermarket for startup funding. So you can go on their platform, tell them what stage you're at, and they basically go, here are your options. And they can either, it's either long-armed sort of off you go, or you can work with an advisor who really helps you plan your journey. And then again, they've got case studies, funding options, funding circle. All of these businesses have case studies of what's worked and the types of businesses that they funded. And that could probably help in terms of you looking at yourself, say, what am I? And, you know, what have other people like my company done in order to get themselves started and get themselves funded?
Nice. And I guess just to emphasize again for people listening, funding isn't the first step. You can do tons of things before you get funding. Get clear on what you're doing, speak to people, do research, try and get some traction or some sales or momentum. It's not, because a lot of people get totally bogged down and spending like 60% of their time thinking, how am I going to get funding? There's loads of things you can do before you have to really worry about that. So do bear that in mind, that it's important that what you're doing is good and it's worthwhile and adds value to people's lives, particularly if it's in the impact space and in any space. Like, it needs to be valuable to people what you're doing. So that's the key thing to focus on. And you will probably find a lot of the funding can flow a little bit easier after that. It's really difficult to get any sort of funding if you don't have any sort of traction. So do keep that in mind. Okay, so
Sam, sorry, just to jump in there, I would say that you again, you might even get sales before you even need to go and get funding. So if you've set up a website and you say, look, this is what we're going to produce, it's almost like Kickstarter, but you could do it yourself. You set up your website, you don't actually need to spend loads of money on that. You can get images, etc., free. and then push that out and see if people are going to pre-order. Brilliant. You don't even need to go down a funding option. Your customers are gonna fund you. So that's again something worth considering, isn't it? I'm not sure if we really mentioned that. And then that builds this story and you go, oh my God, look, 100 people wanted it before I'd even made it. So it's clearly a problem that's out there and that I can solve.
That's a great point. Crowdfunding, Kickstarter, the Crowdcube, Seeders, there's all these great websites you can kind of go onto and get funding, and not have to spend tons of money to produce anything. Sorry, should we? Is somebody comfortable explaining the difference between equity crowdfunding and rewards-based crowdfunding? Just because there is a clear distinction between the two, and they both mean different things.
Yeah, I can.
I was going to say, Esme nodded.
Yes, so rewards-based crowdfunding is when a group of people will contribute money towards your project, really without expecting anything in return. So there's donation-based or rewards. They're quite similar, but donation is just simply a donation. So they don't expect anything back. Reward is when you can provide, if you've got a product-based business, you can give, a keyring, you can give a tote bag, you can give something, but really they're not expecting a huge amount back. Equity-based crowdfunding is something a bit different. So this is when a crowd of people give you money in return for equity. So they'll take a stake, a share, a part of your business. And what you're doing ultimately is giving up part of your control of your business. So that's really important to understand the difference between those two ones.
Perfect. Far better than I could have explained. So thank you for swooping in and saving that. I'm going to start going through some audience questions now, and for everybody listening, do feel free to pop more questions in. One thing that's been mentioned is a book has been mentioned twice. It's more relevant for people who are equity fundraising. Is a book called Venture Deals, which apparently is quite good to kind of talk through that process. So a couple of people in the chat have actually mentioned that. So if you're going down the kind of equity funding route, check that out. Okay, so question for Liz mainly. I'm starting a social enterprise in the combating climate change space. What are the routes for funding? The funding's mainly for marketing activities so that it raises awareness of what they're actually trying to do. So I know it's a little bit of a broad question, but what springs to mind for starting a social enterprise combating climate change?
Yeah, so firstly, I think there's lots of small grants that you can get for this type of activity. So even just a few £100s to support. So I think unlimited are pretty good in terms of as a student to be able to pull in a few £100s to support sort of the development of your early stage idea. But yeah, I'd just start by looking up organisations like Unlimited and other sort of impact focused sort of super seed stage grants, because there are lots out there. So Unlimited would be my suggestion if you're a student doing this.
Great. What interesting social business models have you seen recently? So just a question to everybody. So who's doing it a little bit differently in terms of how they're going about getting set up that you've seen?
Well, I can talk a little bit about Zebras Unite. It has a really interesting business model. So Zebras Unite started as a movement. We've now turned ourselves into a cooperative so that we can be sustainable. We're a co-op, we're a non-profit, and we have a venture fund as well. So there's different reasons for each of those, but essentially it means there's more funding available if you've got a non-profit and a for-profit business arm. We've also got our fund that is additional revenue streams that will go back into the co-op. It's a very interesting business model and very complex and took us a very long time to set up. But I would say be creative. There's a lot of opportunity to be creative around business models. Don't just go for the very traditional ones.
And you're not fixed, I guess, is sparked from that as well. You don't have to stick to one type of company structure. You can set up different types. And I know, Liz, with Crisis, you mentioned before the webinar started that you've set up a kind of an arm that can invest into companies there's the standalone charity as well. So you can kind of play around and use different kind of, it doesn't all have to be within one entity. There could be a couple of entities which can potentially allow you more freedom to do things. It might be interesting, Liz, actually, to chat a little bit about that, if you don't mind, around how crisis is kind of getting structured.
Yeah, so at the moment we are doing this through our existing charity. So we will be taking equity investments in businesses, and it will be managed through our existing charity, but we're also looking at setting up potentially a subsidiary to manage the risk. So that's something that, you know, in terms of obviously we're an established organisation, so we have to manage risk in a specific way. But you know, when you're early stage, you know, you just need to think about, you know, what is the best model to support the growth of this business. And I'd be taking advice from lots of different organizations, but Seed Legals is an organization where you can get lots of legal advice and a really early stage, like basically 101s in sort of advice around how you set up and sort of some of the common questions that people have around the legals of setting up. So again, another tip, look up Seed Legals.
Nice.
But also
Sorry.
make one more quick.
Oh, yeah.
If you're not at a point where you can afford, like, you know, legal advice, when you think about what kind of structure you might go after, it's a bit more creative. Have a look at the other business models out there. You know, have a look at some examples, really dig into how they exist, and you might be surprised about how creative some of these organizations are. So.
Yeah, I was just to jump in, I was going to draw on an example of a business that we funded in 2019. So we funded a business called The Plattery, which was led by Aisha. She took 15 grand from us. I think it's a profit business. And then we got around to pandemic. So what she does is she delivers platters for parties and businesses, et cetera, and they are amazing. She comes in and just basically converts a table into you know, a grazing plate. Now obviously hit the pandemic, no one's wanting grazing tables, no one wants platters, businesses are all closing down. What did she do? She noticed that there were people who couldn't get food. She created a oh my gosh, and the name's just gone from me. I've got really bad lockdown brain. She basically it's gone, but she created another business, and she did it's essentially, it's like a Meals on Wheels, and so all of her efforts were going into that, and she was fundraising for it, and it was like, well, this is still a need, so she's still providing thousands of meals on a weekly basis. And so what she's done now is she's set up a charity for that business, and the Plattery still exists, and the Plattery is funding the charity. So she's now got two businesses. They're both food related, essentially dealing with different problems. One is fueling the other. And I think that formula is really great. And I think that's possibly, I mean, I don't know enough about charities, but I think that's essentially, from, you know, what I'm hearing, it's where charities are going, aren't they? In order to get that sustainable income coming in, so that they can do the stuff that they're interested and want to do, rather than spend so much time fundraising, which must just, I just imagine it must be exhausting. It's the same as if you're trying to fundraise for a business.
Yeah, that's a really good point around, like, almost just looking at the organization as a vehicle to do things, or you could set up multiple vehicles. And an example that might be useful is like Toast Ale, for example, who they take food waste. They're a social enterprise, so they give 50%, actually 100%, I believe, of the profits go to charities. They have their product business, so they reuse food waste, which in this case is bread. So bread that was going to be chucked in the bin, they take that in and they brew beer and they sell that, and they distribute all their profits back to charities to support programs that they do. So it's kind of, yeah, it's really good to just look at different examples that are out there and seeing how people are doing things. Change Please, I'm sure you know them, Liz, that work a lot with homeless organizations. They're a social enterprise as well. They upskill homeless people to become baristas. You'll probably see coffee carts if you're in London, and I think they're around the UK and they're on Virgin trains now also. They upskill homeless people to be baristas, and they help them get housing, they help them get set up with bank accounts. They do all sorts of great work and kind of provide opportunities then for them to go on to get employment in other organizations. But they're fundamentally a coffee business, but it's a coffee business kind of doing really good things with the proceeds. They could have easily just been set up as as a normal coffee business, but they've decided kind of what more can we do? How can we kind of bring more people on this journey and improve lives? And they from what I can see, they seem to be massively successful and are growing every year massively. So do check out like kind of organizations like that to see what they're doing. And I think the B Corp website's a really good website to check out as well. They're generally companies, a lot of them are a bit more later stage, but a lot of them are quite early stage, and they're just doing good things with the people in their organizations or with the profits that they have. So there's loads of kind of good examples, and do check them out. Sorry, I've totally rambled on there. Anything else to add on that point?
Yeah, just to pick up on the fundraising trend, because I think this is really interesting insight actually. So across the charity sector, traditional fundraising has declined since 2016. So the way in which people are giving to causes. So obviously during the pandemic, lots of charities received lots of funding, but the trend has been year-on-year decline. And what we find is our supporters, especially if they're Gen Z, millennial, they want to be actively involved in finding the solution to the problems. They want their talents to be used, they want their skills to be used, which is exactly why we're looking at how do we fund startups, how do we work with startups. It goes right through people who volunteer in our shops anymore. They want to be activists, who do volunteer in our shops, they want to be activists as much as they want to be supporting us in the delivery of that business. So I just think that's a really interesting trend to be aware of when you're setting yourself up, that people do want to feel that they're, that's why you're seeing ethical purchases or go up as well during the lockdown. People are being much more conscious about where they put their money. So you should be treating your customers increasingly as citizens who want to make the world a better place, rather than just, and I think that businesses that aren't thinking about that in their setup, in their structure, are going to fail in the long term, because ethics matter. If you look at the big tech giants, they're going to have one of the toughest years ever, because then, they haven't thought about ethics right from the beginning, and how they're looking after communities. And so I think thinking about your ethics right from the beginning, and how you're setting yourself up, how you involve your customers in a more citizen way, I think that's really important.
Nice. Yeah, totally agree with that. That's a really good point to make. And I get the sense every company in 5 years' time will have to have a real social or environmental conscience. Like, I think that's just, and it's really good to see that's just kind of where it's going. It's so important. And it's also, why wouldn't you want to do that? If you're a founder, you're going to be working hard trying to set something up. Setting up a business organization that does good, it's the best thing you can do, that it kind of helps people's lives or kind of helps save the planet. So okay, next question is, this is an interesting one. So do grant funding providers look down on people who apply that have a full-time job? And I guess the context for that is, I don't know, might it be seen as a sign of a lack of commitment to the project?
So me and Esme are both shaking our heads. Absolutely. So one of the things, sorry, I will shut up in a second, but something that really bothers me is that actually, you don't go from suddenly, overnight being able to fully sustain yourself and your business. You absolutely need to work it up, and we're going to lose diversity in entrepreneurs unless we allow people to carry on their work. And so if you're a mum and you're setting up and you've got caring responsibilities, whatever stage of life you're at, you can't expect people to just suddenly switch overnight. So absolutely not. And if anyone who does look down, well, they're not fit to be giving you the grant. So that's my feeling.
Well said.
Nice.
It's true. You've got to be able to test. Not everyone has got the cash sat in the bank to just go and explore for 6 months. And again, it's a really important factor that we take into consideration. And the majority of the people that we do support are working full time, and they're setting this idea up on the side. The whole point of setting up a business is you have a hypothesis, you go and test it, you might get it wrong, and then you reiterate. So yeah, that's a really interesting question. If there are people sat on grant boards going, you're not dedicated enough, that would be a real shame.
Yeah, I think it's one of those myths again, that because a handful of people quit uni and set up a massive business, that's what everybody has to do. It's like, again, that's a tiny percentage, less than a percentage of people have kind of done that. It's like, having a job means you'll have longer to work on the idea and figure it out ultimately, which can be a really, really good thing. There will be a point where you kind of have to go, and you can't predict when that will be, but there will be a point where you go, look, I just have to go full time on this venture potentially, or I need more help to get things done. So it's not, you could set up a business on the side or an organization on the side and have a team to work on it and keep your full-time job. Like, that is an option. You don't have to be all in on it, or you could jump in at a certain point. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, we're totally overrunning here. Is everybody okay to stay for another 5 or 6 minutes, or is that okay? There's no pancakes being made like last week. Okay, great. Thank you very much. The next question is, okay, yeah, this is a good one from Samuel Millen Kramer. Just a general question. What are your perspectives on the build community first and product offering second debate? And he asked that in the context of he's in the early stages of doing both. So is there an argument for build a community and then release a product or service? Or what are people's thoughts on that?
Can I be a cop-out and say it totally depends on the product or the service that you're developing or the problem that you're solving? So, you know, I think firstly, I think the most important thing you do in your early stages is take out your proposition and test it. Have lots of conversations with as many people as you can who you think you're solving the problem for, and like just listen and reshape consistently. But I think it completely depends on the product or service that you're developing. I think from Imperial time, obviously we had lots of students who'd come up with these crazy inventions. So they were taking a very solution. I've got this solution, how do I fit it into? And that absolutely is not a great approach, because you end up just, you know, you become wedded to your solution. You don't see the way in which you need to change it to shape, to solve the pain points of your users or customers. So I think it completely depends on your product or service, but you should always be speaking to potential users right from the beginning. And I think actually it's getting over that fear of speaking to anyone, which actually I think is tough for most founders, actually putting yourself out there and like being really nervous about sharing your idea. You need to do that as early as possible.
Nice. And any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, like
Sorry.
just a thought in terms of, I think it's an interesting question. I think that, to echo Liz's comments, that you are, as you go out and you speak to people, you're hopefully building your community that way, because they're going, God, it sounds really awesome what you're doing. Can you check back with me and tell me when you've done it? I would also, if you're thinking about like, what questions do I ask? The mum test is a really good technique. There's a book that's really worth reading. I think you can access it via PDF. And it's the questions that you ask, because very often the wrong questions get asked. It's like, do you have this problem? Oh yeah, okay, fine. Rather than like, how do you find in this scenario? So that it's eliciting the issue rather than saying what I think the issue is. That would be some advice I would give in relation to that.
Yeah, so kind of like figuring out how people deal with certain problems they have in their life, and then seeing does that kind of fit in with the solution that you might have, rather than going, do you want to pay me £20 for this thing? You kind of lead people down a bit of a path. One example that might be interesting, just on the community thing, there's an organization called Heights, which is a kind of a brain nutrition supplement. And kind of a bit of the backstory on that was the founder of that company, I think it was about 2 years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, had suffered from insomnia for about 6 months. He got prescribed nutrition supplements, like a bit of a cocktail to kind of help with his insomnia. And then he got very into brain health, which is a kind of a thing that people don't tend to take much care of their health. It's a bit of an afterthought, how your brain is fed. So anyway, so he set up a blog and a newsletter, released it for probably 12 months, set up a podcast, and it was only like 18 months in or so. And part of it was that he was developing the product in the background a little bit, I think, over that time, because it took quite a while. After the 18 months or so is when he released the product, and he'd built a large community of like something like 40 or 50,000 people on that weekly newsletter. So in that case, and as Liz touched on, it kind of depends on the business and the circumstance, but in his case, it's worked very well, that he kind of added lots of value to his community, build up a reputation in that space. And then when the product was ready, he released it, and there's a bit of a market there already, but it totally depends on what you're doing.
I would also make a quick point of, can you build a community? Is that actually your skill set? I think it's a very hard thing to do. It's a really undervalued skill. I've spent all year trying to work out how to do it, and my God, it takes some effort. If you're good at it, then 100%. If you have a business that is appropriate for it, then go for it. But if you're not, do not waste your time, because there's just no point. Like, to put it bluntly, if you're not good at it, do something else. Do a newsletter, do a podcast, work on your personal brand in some other way. Find the thing that you're really good at and double down on that.
It's also, I think it's the job title of the future. Community manager is becoming more and more an important part of the team.
Yeah. We have one. So we have one in our team, because actually, and you know what's most important? Consistency. And if you're starting out, you can't be consistent, then you're just going to end up pissing people off. Like, sorry, I said I wouldn't swear, Sam, but yeah, you are going to piss people off.
But to Esme's point as well, I mean, don't be afraid to bring someone in that can do that. If it's not your skill set, there is probably someone out there or someone in your network who's like, oh my word, yes, let me have that opportunity, just to test it, try, they can join your journey.
Yeah. And I guess that's a good point in general, is to get support on things from a friend or from family. Like I send everything, any blog or anything like that, or if we even have booklets for creative kits here, I send it to my mum. Just spend time, give feedback and send it back. Like, you'd be amazed at what kind of help you can get out there. There could be somebody who's really passionate about what you're trying to build as well, who could be that community person, as people have mentioned, who could put that time in and are really passionate to spend the time on that. But yeah, as Liz said, consistency is so important. It builds trust. People go to you then when they see that you're consistent with what you're doing, and you become a bit more of a go-to in the space. But yeah, pick your battles. Okay, so this is a bit of a general question here as well. So can we get some advice on how to find a problem big enough to justify building a startup? This is an interesting question for all sorts of reasons, but yeah, Liz, go for it.
I've got a problem for you. How do we end homelessness in the UK? And come and support me in doing that. So actually, in a serious point, we're running a challenge at the moment with Ingenuity. They're a collaboration of different universities. It's called the Ingenuity Challenge. So if you don't have an idea yet and you want to work on an idea, they're starting that out. So we're engaging with lots of those early stage programs as well, to kind of build a pipeline of future talent and products and services that can help us end homelessness. So choose ending homelessness. Nobody in 21st century Britain should be without a home. So.
Yeah, can't disagree with that. So yeah, there you go. It's an anonymous attendee, but whoever it was, try and solve homelessness if you can, or at least contribute to solving it. Another point that might be useful on that is, I think that people can get a little bit bogged down in, is this going to be a massive business or a massive thing? Just, you can start really small. So even on the homelessness point of view, what can you do locally that can support? Can you volunteer time in an organization working on this problem already? You don't have to go off and build a kind of a big organization. You can start small and incrementally kind of increase the impact of what you do, or whether it's volunteering or even join a startup that's doing it already that you might be passionate about. You don't have to start the whole thing yourself. Kind of look at the different options that are out there.
Yeah, not to completely talk about homelessness, but actually I think it's what's really important is what you're passionate about as well. What are you going to be sort of, if this is something you're doing on the side, what's going to keep you sort of excited and passionate and wanting to, and having those ideas in the shower? I think the problem needs to be something you really care about working on, or you can get really into the meat of it. Otherwise, I think you end up, the risk is you lose interest and lose the motivation to support.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Quick point. If you are looking to gauge the size of your market, depends if the market already exists. If the market already exists, there's a lot of stats online that can give you an estimate, but I'd also be slightly wary of it, because investors can be biased. So to give an example, I had somebody that was trying to raise money to build a product for female black hair. And all investors were like, oh, it's so niche. Oh, it's so tiny. There's not enough people who want it. And because the stats just aren't there. But it is a huge market. We know it's a huge market. So don't necessarily believe everything you see on the internet. Think about it logically and do your own research.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, from an investor feedback perspective,
Mm.
and I haven't tons of experience in this at all, but it'd be interesting, Esme, as in just to extend that point a little bit about what not to listen to and what to listen to, because sometimes you know more than the potential investor because you're closer to the space. Does that make sense? I don't know. I don't even have a question here, but does that make
100%.
sense?
No, it's a very good point. It's a very good point. 100%. As an entrepreneur, if you're really doing your research into a business, you should know more than the investor. Like I was on a call with Check Warner today, one of the founders of Adventures, the venture capital firm. She was like, yeah, you as an entrepreneur, you know more than me, and that's fine. I want you to tell me about your business. I want you to tell me how large you think this market is. I want you to give me all that information, because venture capitalists, actually, if you're a good investor, you just want to learn. They're just super interested in these markets. They're super interested in things they don't know about. And if you can tell them things that they don't know, they will lap it up. Love it.
Nice. So yeah, I get what could be useful on that as well is don't take a no as a no, the idea is bad. There's all sorts of reasons why you mightn't get investment, why your grant application mightn't happen. If you believe in the idea and you can see the value that it'll add to people, just persist and keep going, and get kind of advice and as much support as you can along the way. Somebody said sometimes feels out of reach, but this made me feel those better.
Oh.
Thank you all very much for contributing to that. Really good point, Liz, as well. Jenny mentioned. Cool. So yeah, there's lots of really nice feedback here. I'll do one more question. So I'll pick. Okay, so it's getting tense now as I choose to. Okay, so this is slightly a long question, but it's good, I think. So well, they're all really good questions. Okay, so from Saul, a few months ago, I founded Give Your Best CIC, as in Community Interest Company. We offer an online platform where people can submit clothes they want to donate, so refugee and asylum-seeking women can shop them for free, and we arrange secure person-to-person shipping. In 4 months, we have over 2,500 items donated by 400 people and nearly 300 women shopping with us, which is brilliant. Would you recommend finding funding/grants in the area of refugee support or fashion sustainability, or both? And she mentions that he or she mentions we're currently entirely volunteer run, including themselves. They're doing it alongside their full-time job. So kind of it's trying to get a sense for, yeah, what kind of funding might be suitable for an organization like that.
Well, firstly, I really want to connect with you. So whoever you are, please add me on LinkedIn. I have a team who manage our retail network. We obviously have the venture studio and the network we're building up of different investors. We're specifically looking at migrant homelessness this year, and so it's an important issue for us. So please connect with me, and I'll see what I can do from the crisis side.
Nice.
I would say both.
Sorry.
I don't know enough about grants, but why not explore both avenues? Again, reach out to someone like the granted consultancy. They could give you some advice in terms of what they've seen in the past. If you're sitting across two sectors, what's the harm? Would be my thoughts.
Yeah, that's really good. And I know you kind of mentioned earlier in the conversation that the applications can take quite a long time, but you can contact the organization and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. Is this roughly in the remit of what you do? They might say no, they might say yes, and then you can kind of work on an application for it. So yeah, you could kind of try both, I think is a good piece of advice there. Okay, I think we should start wrapping up. This has been really, really useful and good, and thank you so much for kind of all the feedback and advice, and for going through all the kind of the questions, because I know sometimes it can be tricky answering kind of questions that come in, but you've all done really, really good. And there's lots of really lovely feedback here, so thanks again for tuning in and for kind of being involved and for giving lots of feedback to people. I'm going to share my screen again and just have 2 closing slides. There will be details to follow people or the organizations from the panel for everybody that's watching. So be sure to take a screenshot or take a photo of it, and you can get in contact with them that way. But otherwise, I don't know if everybody wants to give a wave or whatever you'd like to do. But thank you so much again
us.
for being involved.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out, and I will try and help.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. So for those that are still with us, thank you. Hopefully it's been useful. I'll just share a couple of details again as we finish. So if you are a city student or recent alumni with a planet or people saving idea, the Pitch for Good competition, the last entries are on February 24th. Take a screenshot, check out the QR code, or go to the City Ventures website. Be sure to submit. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email. My email will be on the next screen and I'll direct you to the right person. So do get involved. Better Space, if you're keen to work from London, when it's safe to do so, be sure to follow at Better Space London or pop onto the website. We have a waiting list that's up and running if you'd like to join us on the journey to creating the new home for social entrepreneurs and change makers and impact businesses. And here are some details for the panel of incredible speakers that we had. So there's the details for Crisis on the left-hand side on Twitter and for Liz's Twitter account. So again, feel free to take a photo or a screenshot. Virgin Startup, where Lissa works, you can check them out on @Virgin Startup, and that's on all social media channels, and it's virginstartup.org is the website. And for Esme, there's Ada Ventures, Zebras Unite, which we mentioned a few times. If you're in the space of setting up a business for good, do join the Zebras Unite Slack channel. There's tons of great resources, and Esme's channel or Twitter is there as well at Esme Verity. If you are shouting about tonight's session, hashtag GEF2021 is the hashtag, and @space_better is the only available Twitter handle we could find for Better Space. Or if you have any questions at all, do drop me an email on sam@betterspace.london. More than happy to help, no matter what it is, whether you need a bit of support or you want to check out an organization, do drop me an email. And then lastly, next week's session is sadly the finale for the Good Entrepreneur Festival, but it's going to be an incredible lineup again. We have 3 very early or relatively early stage founders of social enterprises, Leho, who tackle homelessness with their clothing brand. There's Lauren from the Little Coffee Company, which is a kind of an ethical coffee company, and Patrick Harding from Joy App, which is all about building community. So do tune in next week from 6:30. If you enter the Pitch for Good competition, you'll find out as well if you're a winner. But otherwise, do follow us. The Better Space newsletter is pretty good as well. So do pop onto the betterspace.london site and sign up to that. It goes out every couple of weeks, and it has tons of information about funding, events that are going on, programs that you can get involved in, all sorts of good stuff. Okay, so that's a wrap for tonight's Good Entrepreneur Festival. It's all about funding. We really, really hope you learned a lot and it kind of helps you on the journey. So yeah, thank you and good night.